My life felt like a dream come true, one of those you're afraid to wake up from. I was about to marry Julian, the man I had pictured for years as the father of my children, my life partner, my safest haven. Everything was prepared with care: the flowers, the menu, the music, even the small details only we understood. My mother cried tears of joy as I looked at myself in the mirror, dressed in my white gown, thinking that I had finally found true happiness. What I didn't know was that this wedding, which was supposed to seal a love story, would actually mark the beginning of my greatest tragedy. From the start, I knew I couldn't walk down the aisle without my best friend, Laura Jenkins, by my side. She was more than just a friend. She was my soul sister, my confidant, the only person who knew every corner of my heart. That's why I chose her as my maid of honor, without a second thought. No one questioned my decision. Everyone knew how deep our connection was. She smiled with a genuine-looking tenderness as she helped me with my veil and made sure everything was perfect. What I didn't know was that behind her sweet eyes, a dark secret was hiding. A secret that would destroy my life from the inside out. We wanted an intimate wedding, far from the hustle and bustle of the city. That's why we chose an elegant estate in the hills of Virginia, surrounded by century-old trees and blooming gardens. The place was magical, with a stately stone manor, cozy rooms, and a hall with high ceilings and enormous windows that let in the warm light of the setting sun. There, surrounded by our families and closest friends, we dreamed of celebrating our love and starting a new life together. Nothing seemed out of place. Everything felt harmonious. But that same place would soon witness the most painful collapse of my existence. We had rented the entire estate for the weekend so that our parents and the wedding party could stay the night before and after the wedding. We wanted it to be more than just an event. We wanted it to be a moment of togetherness, shared laughter, and joyful anticipation. The night before, we all had dinner together on the patio, which was lit by string lights, with soft music playing and glasses of wine in our hands. Julian seemed calm, even affectionate, and Laura never left my side, just as always. No one suspected that behind all that calm, a storm was brewing that would change our lives forever. That night, I went to bed with a heart full of hope, mentally replaying every moment of the day, convinced that I had finally found happiness. I fell asleep late, feeling nervous but happy, picturing the moment I would walk toward Julian in my white dress. The next morning, the first rays of sun came through the window, and I woke up with an energy I hadn't felt since I was a little girl. Laura was the first one to enter my room, bringing me breakfast with a smile that I now remember as a mask. I felt grateful, excited, and secure. I couldn't have known that nothing was real anymore. When it was time, my father took my arm and we walked toward the garden where everyone was waiting for us. The soft sound of string instruments, the white petals on the ground, the tearful eyes of our loved ones, everything looked like it was from a storybook. Julian was waiting for me at the end of the aisle with glistening eyes and the smile that had made me fall in love with him so many times. I walked toward him, holding back tears, convinced that I was taking the most important and beautiful step of my life. No one could have seen that my "I do" would actually be the beginning of my greatest heartbreak. When the officiant asked if we accepted to join our lives, I didn't hesitate for a second. My voice was shaky but firm as I said, "I do." I had my eyes full of love as I looked at Julian. He also said, "I do," with a smile, though for a moment I thought his expression dimmed right after he said it. I just figured it was nerves, that we all feel that little bit of anxiety when we take such a big step. We kissed to the sound of applause, surrounded by white flowers and tears of emotion. In that instant, I believed it was all worth it, that our love was real. The celebration was exactly as we had imagined, intimate, elegant, and full of joy. We ate under a starry sky with soft music playing in the background and candles lit at every table. There were moments of laughter, anecdotes, and hugs that seemed sincere, as if we were all a part of something eternal. Julian talked to our guests and laughed, but there was something distant in the way he looked at me. I didn't want to think too much of it. I thought he was just tired from all the planning and decided to enjoy every second. My father stood up, emotional, to toast our union, speaking of how proud he was of me and how he had watched our love grow. Everyone applauded, and Julian raised his glass with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, as if he were forcing the emotion. I looked at him, trying to find that usual spark, but all I found was a strange silence in his gaze. I thought that maybe I was just being too sensitive, that I shouldn't look for problems where there weren't any. But deep down, something inside of me was starting to crack, even though I didn't know it yet. After the party, we went up to the bridal suite together, a warm and elegant space we had decorated with flowers and candles to make it unforgettable. My heart was pounding, a mix of excitement and nerves, as I thought about how special this night, our first as husband and wife, would be. I closed the door softly, wanting to prolong the intimate moment, believing we were about to seal our story with love. Julian placed his watch on the nightstand, took off his shoes without looking at me, and sighed heavily. I went to hug him, and that's when I heard it. "I'm tired," he said, not looking at me, his tone dry and flat as if I wasn't even there. I stood frozen, trying to figure out if it was a joke, if something had happened that I didn't see. But his face was serious, distant, and completely devoid of emotion or desire. He turned his back to me, unbuttoned his shirt, and went straight to the twin bed that was in a corner of the room. He didn't say goodnight or turn around. He just turned off the light, leaving the room in a silence that hurt more than any yell. I sat on the edge of the marriage bed, not knowing what to do with my body or my thoughts, feeling invisible on the most important night of my life. I waited for what felt like endless minutes for a gesture, a word, an explanation, but all I got was the sound of his quiet breathing from the other side of the room. I slowly lay down on the bed, unable to hold back the tears. I slowly lay down on the bed, unable to hold back the tears. They slid down the sides of my face and soaked into the pillow, hot and humiliating. This was supposed to be the night I had dreamed of since I was a teenager, the night all my doubts about love would finally disappear. Instead, I felt like a stranger lying in a room full of flowers and candles, next to a man who had just turned his back on me. I tried to breathe slowly to calm myself down, to tell myself that maybe it was just exhaustion, nerves, too many emotions. "Tomorrow will be different," I whispered inside my head, trying to cling to that hope. "Tomorrow we'll talk. Tomorrow he'll explain. Tomorrow we'll laugh about how tired he was." I stared at the ceiling in the darkness, listening to the ticking of the old clock on the wall and the occasional creak of the wooden beams as the house settled. Julian's breathing on the other side of the room was steady, calm, as if he was sleeping soundly, completely unbothered by the fact that his wife was silently falling apart just a few feet away. I don't know how long I lay there like that, half crying, half staring into nothingness. At some point, my body must have given in because I drifted into a shallow, restless sleep. I woke up with a jolt. The room was pitch black, and for a moment I didn't know where I was. I heard the clock tick, tick, tick somewhere in the darkness, and the faint sound of the wind brushing against the window panes. My heart was pounding, as if I had been running. Then I realized what had woken me up. It was a sound, not a loud one. A soft noise like a door handle being turned slowly, metal clicking, wood moving just enough to complain in a low creak. I held my breath. The nightstand lamp was off, but a faint strip of light under the door leading out to the hallway told me someone had turned on a light outside our suite. It was that light that made the tiny particles in the air visible, floating like dust motes in some cruel, magical story. I turned my head toward the other side of the room. Julian's bed was empty. The sheets where he'd been lying earlier were rumpled and half pulled back. The pillow showed the faint shape of where his head had rested, but now he wasn't there. For a second, I thought maybe he was in the bathroom. "Julian," I whispered. No answer. I pushed myself up on my elbows, wiping at my face. My throat was dry. I listened again. There it was, the soft click of the suite door, opening very carefully, then the muffled sound of footsteps on the carpet outside. Not heavy, not hurried, a careful, practiced rhythm. My stomach twisted. Why would he be sneaking out like that? I swung my legs off the bed and let my feet touch the cold floor, wincing at the chill. Slowly, I stood up and padded across the room, my bare feet barely making a sound. I stopped near the door, my heart in my throat. Through the crack under the door, I saw a shadow pass. A second later, I heard something else. A whisper. Low, almost inaudible. A man's voice very close to the door. "Julian, I told you not to come up here," he murmured. There was a pause. Then another voice, this time a woman's, responding in a hushed tone that still carried a familiar lilt. "I couldn't sleep either," she whispered. "Besides, you said you wanted to talk." My blood turned to ice. I knew that voice. I didn't need to see her to recognize it. I had heard it laugh with me, cry with me, whisper secrets in the middle of the night. It was the voice that had told me I will always be by your side more times than I could count. Laura, my best friend, my maid of honor, my soul sister. My hand flew to my mouth before I could make a sound. I pressed my palm hard against my lips, forcing my breathing to stay as quiet as possible. I moved closer to the door, slowly, terrified that even the slightest creak of the floorboards might give me away. The old wood under my feet groaned softly, but the noise in the hall covered it. They weren't standing far away. They were right outside. I could hear every word. "This is insane," Julian muttered. "If someone sees us—" "Everyone's drunk or asleep," Laura softly interrupted. "Relax. We've been careful all this time. No one has any idea." Careful. All this time. Her words hit me like a slap. My mind raced, trying to fit the pieces together. How many late-night messages between the two of them had I brushed off as wedding logistics? How many times had I seen them talking quietly at the edge of a room and told myself I was being paranoid? How often had Julian's phone lit up with her name, and I had smiled, thinking, I'm so lucky they get along. I felt sick. On the other side of the door, Julian sighed. "That doesn't make this right," he said. "She's just in there. This is our wedding night." The word "our" twisted in my chest like a knife. Laura's response came a second later, soft and bitter. "Your wedding night," she emphasized, "not mine." A silence followed, a silence so dense that I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I could picture them without seeing them. Julian running a hand through his hair the way he did when he was frustrated. Laura crossing her arms, looking at him with that mixture of hurt and defiance she used when she wanted something her way. "It's what we decided," Julian finally said, his voice low. "We talked about this 1,000 times. It was too late to cancel anything. The families, the deposits, the venue. She would have been destroyed." "And what do you think this is doing to me?" Laura hissed, the whisper turning sharp. "Do you think I enjoy standing next to her, fixing her veil, pretending I'm happy, while she vows to spend forever with the man I—" She cut herself off, but the unfinished sentence hung in the air like smoke. "The man I— what? Loved? Had? Shared?" I felt my legs weaken. The hallway light flickered briefly, casting shadows under the door. I pressed my back against the cold wall next to it, sliding down just enough so the crack wouldn't give me away. Julian exhaled, and when he spoke again, there was an exhaustion in his voice I had never heard before. "You know why we did this," he said. "Her family helped me when no one else believed in me. Her father invested in my business. They paid for everything. Call it karma, call it obligation, I don't care. I couldn't just walk away." "So instead, you married her," Laura shot back, her tone tight. "And what? You keep me as your—" "What, Julian? Your shadow? Your second choice? Your dirty little secret in the hallway while she sleeps in that room thinking you love her?" Each word felt like a hammer blow. I didn't even realize I was shaking until my teeth started chattering, even though the room was warm. "I never said you were second choice," Julian answered, his voice softer. "You know how I feel about you." There was a small sound then, like cloth brushing against cloth. I didn't have to see it to know he had reached for her. "Don't," she whispered, but the protest was thin. "Someone could— If we're quiet, they won't," he murmured. My stomach lurched. I squeezed my eyes shut, every cell in my body screaming at me to fling the door open, to confront them, to tear everything apart right there in the hallway. But I couldn't move. I was frozen, trapped between the urge to know everything and the desperate wish that this was all a nightmare I could still wake up from. "You promised," Laura whispered again, her voice breaking now. "You promised this wouldn't last, that this was just a sacrifice, that you would fix it after." "I will," Julian said. "Just not yet. She can't handle it right now. You saw her today. She was glowing. If I tell her everything now, it will destroy her." A humorless laugh caught in Laura's throat. "It will destroy her," she repeated. "And what do you think it's doing to me? To us?" Us. That word. So small, so casual, as if they were the real couple, whispering in the dark, while I was just an obstacle asleep in the next room. Or so they thought. "Please," Julian murmured. "Don't make this harder. I need time. Let's just get through tonight. We'll figure out the rest." "How long are you going to ask me to wait?" she asked. "You've been saying the same thing for months." Months. The room swam in front of my eyes. This hadn't started recently. Not a slip, not a moment of weakness. It had a timeline, a history, a pattern, repeating, practiced. "Laura," he said, and there was so much softness in the way he said her name that it made me want to scream, "You know I love you." The words I had waited all night to hear, spoken on the other side of a door, to someone else. There was another small sound then, like someone being pulled into an embrace, a quiet intake of breath, a muffled sigh. I couldn't take it anymore. I stumbled away from the door, my hand flying out to steady myself on the dresser. My vision blurred with fresh tears. The room felt too small, like the walls were closing in. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth so hard it hurt, trying to keep any noise from escaping. I didn't know which was worse, the betrayal or the fact that neither of them seemed to feel even a second of guilt about it. They talked about me like I was a fragile vase they were afraid to knock over, while simultaneously shaking the table under me. Seconds passed, maybe minutes. Eventually, the whispers outside the door faded. The light under the crack dimmed, then disappeared. I heard footsteps moving away down the hall, then another door opening quietly somewhere else. I stood in the middle of the suite, bathed in moonlight coming through the big window, my wedding dress hanging neatly in the corner like the costume of a character who had already finished her role. I sank to the floor. The tears came again, but they were different this time. Not just sadness, not just hurt. There was rage in them now. Rage at Julian for using me as a shield for his conscience. Rage at Laura for looking me in the eyes as she put on my veil, knowing full well what she was hiding. Rage at myself for ignoring the tiny red flags that had fluttered around me like warning signs I refused to read. On our wedding night, the night I had dreamed of as the beginning of everything, I realized I had actually stepped into the middle of someone else's love story, and I was the one who didn't belong. I don't know how long I sat there on the floor, hugging my knees, my wedding dress like a white puddle of fabric around me. At some point, the tears stopped by themselves, not because the pain was gone, but because my body simply couldn't produce anymore. I felt empty, frozen. The room was silent again. No whispers, no footsteps. Somewhere, far away in another wing of the estate, a door closed, someone laughed, a glass clinked. The world kept moving, completely unaware that mine had just broken clean in half. Eventually, I dragged myself up onto the bed. The scent of fresh flowers and vanilla candles, which hours earlier had felt romantic and cozy, now made me nauseous. My makeup was ruined, my hair was falling out of its careful updo, the lace of my dress scratched my skin, but I didn't have the strength to change. I lay there in my wedding gown, staring at the dim outline of the ceiling beams, and one thought kept circling in my head. They did this to me. Together. Not a mistake. Not a one-time weakness. A choice. Several choices, actually. Every hidden message, every stolen glance, every secret meeting, each one a brick in the wall they had built between us. I must have dozed off from sheer exhaustion, because the next thing I remember is the soft gray light of dawn creeping through the curtains. The clock said 6:07 a.m. My head throbbed. My eyes burned. The other bed, the one where Julian had slept for maybe an hour before sneaking out, was still empty. His shoes were gone. So was his watch. I let out a bitter little laugh. Apparently, I had spent my wedding night entirely alone. I swung my legs off the bed, feeling stiff and heavy. My dress was wrinkled and smeared in places with mascara from when I had wiped my face. I looked like a ghost that had tried to be a bride and failed halfway. I went to the bathroom, splashed water on my face, and stared at my reflection. My eyes were swollen, my lipstick was gone. But what struck me the most wasn't how wrecked I looked. It was the expression. I didn't see the girl who had floated down the aisle the afternoon before, full of hope. I saw someone else. Someone sharper. Someone with edges. Slowly, I closed my eyes and took a long, shaky breath. I could walk downstairs right now, find them, confront them in the kitchen in front of the coffee machine and yesterday's leftover cake. I could scream, throw things, demand explanations that would never be good enough, or I could do something they didn't expect. I wiped my face with a towel and walked back into the bedroom. My phone was still on the nightstand, screen dark, battery low. I picked it up and turned it on. Dozens of notifications flooded the screen. Congratulations, photos from friends, tagged posts. I ignored them all and opened my message threads. Julian, Laura. I scrolled. The more I looked, the more patterns I saw. Messages at odd hours. Inside jokes that didn't sound like simple wedding planning. Little comments like, "Don't worry, she bought it," or "We'll talk when she's not around." My stomach twisted again. How long had I been circling the edges of my own life, too in love to see that the center was already occupied? As I was scrolling, a memory from the night before flashed through my mind like a spark. That moment standing next to the door, listening to their voices through the crack. My phone had been in my hand then. At one point, I had gripped it so hard I thought it would break. My thumb had hovered over the screen, over the red button in my voice recording app. My heart skipped a beat. I quickly opened the voice recorder. There it was. A file from 12:03 a.m., 33 minutes long. With shaking hands, I pressed play and held the phone close to my ear. The first seconds were muffled, the sound of fabric, my breathing, the creak of the floor. But then their voices came through, clear, amplified, undeniable. Laura. You said you wanted to talk. Julian. If someone sees us. Laura. We've been careful all this time. No one has any idea. I stopped playback, my heart hammering. So no, it hadn't been a nightmare. I hadn't imagined anything. I had proof. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen. Then, slowly, a plan began to form. Not a loud, destructive plan. Not the kind where you throw your ring at someone and burn their clothes. Something quieter, cleaner. If there was one thing I'd learned watching my parents all these years, my father with his calm logic, my mother with her ability to hold her ground, it was that you don't have to scream to be heard. Sometimes, you just have to pick the right time to speak. Downstairs, I could hear faint sounds now. Pipes groaning, a door closing, the distant clatter of plates in the kitchen. People were waking up. The day after the wedding was supposed to be a relaxed brunch, last photos, hugs goodbye. I opened the wardrobe and pulled out a simple dress, not the elaborate one I'd planned for the morning after, just a soft, knee-length one in pale blue. I brushed my hair into a low ponytail, wiped away the remnants of my ruined makeup, and put on a bit of concealer, not to hide the fact that I had cried, but just to look human. My wedding ring sat on the nightstand, gleaming innocently in the soft light. I picked it up, turned it between my fingers, and slipped it into the pocket of my dress instead of onto my finger. Then I took my phone, slipped that into the other pocket, and walked out of the room. The hallway smelled like coffee and bacon and that particular morning-after mix of perfume and sleep. Through an open door, I saw one of Julian's cousins, still in pajama pants, yawning and checking his phone. "Morning," he said. "Morning," I replied, my voice surprisingly steady. I descended the stairs slowly, one hand lightly touching the rail. From the dining room, I could already hear voices. My mother's gentle laugh, my father's low rumble, Julian's father trying to organize something with the staff. I paused in the doorway for a second, taking in the scene. Everyone was there. My parents, Julian's parents, some of our friends from out of town. Laura. She was standing near the window, a cup of coffee in her hands, her hair neatly brushed, the soft pink dress she'd worn for the brunch, making her look almost angelic. When she saw me, her eyes widened just a bit, then she smiled. "There she is," she said brightly. "The bride. How did you sleep?" Her voice did not shake, not even a little. If I hadn't heard her in that hallway a few hours earlier, I would have believed her. Julian was at the far end of the table talking to his mother. When he turned and saw me, his expression flickered. Just for a second, something like guilt crossed his eyes. Then he plastered on a warm smile and opened his arms. "Hey, baby," he said, "come here." I walked into the room, nodding as my mother stood up to kiss my cheek, holding my hand a bit longer than usual. "You okay?" she whispered. "I will be," I whispered back. I went to the empty chair next to Julian but didn't sit. "Before we eat," I said, my voice surprisingly clear in the clatter of cutlery and chatter, "can I ask everyone for just a few minutes?" The room quieted. "What's wrong?" Julian asked, his smile twitching slightly. My father frowned, looking between us. I took my phone out of my pocket. "Last night was not what I imagined for my wedding night," I said. "I couldn't sleep. I wish I could say it was just nerves, but it wasn't." I turned to Laura. Her eyes were locked on my phone now. "I heard something," I continued. "Something I wasn't meant to hear." "Sweetheart, maybe this isn't the time," Julian started, but I raised a hand. "Actually," I said, "this is exactly the time." My thumb hovered over the screen. For a second, I wondered if I could really do it, if I could stand here in front of both our families and lay the truth bare. The part of me that hated conflict begged me to sit down, to smile, to pretend. But then I saw, in my mind, the image of myself in that room, alone in my dress, crying into a pillow while they whispered in the hall. And suddenly, I wasn't afraid anymore. I hit play and turned the volume up. At first, all anyone heard was the creak of floorboards and faint static. Then came Julian's voice, clear as if he were standing next to them. "I told you not to come up here." Someone at the table snapped their head toward him. A second later, Laura's voice followed, unmistakable. "I couldn't sleep either. Besides, you said you wanted to talk." The air went electric. The color drained from Julian's face. Laura's grip tightened around her coffee cup. I didn't look at either of them. I watched my parents instead, their brows knitted, their faces going slack as the conversation continued. "We've been careful all this time. No one has any idea." "You know why we did this. It was too late to cancel anything." "She would have been destroyed." "You promised this wouldn't last, that you would fix it after." A fork clattered onto a plate. Julian's mother covered her mouth with her hand. My mother's eyes filled with tears. Julian lunged toward me. "Turn it off," he hissed. This is private. This is out of context." "Out of context?" my father repeated, slowly rising from his chair. The context seems painfully clear to me, Julian. I stopped the recording. For a heartbeat, the silence was so complete I could hear the clock in the hallway ticking. Laura looked like she might faint. Her eyes were glassy, her face ashy, the coffee cup trembling in her hand. "Is this some kind of joke?" Julian's father asked, looking between us. I finally turned to face Julian. "Would you like to explain?" I asked quietly. "Why, on our wedding night, you were out in the hallway whispering with my maid of honor about a plan and a sacrifice, and how I would be destroyed if I knew the truth?" He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Look," he said, his voice cracking. "It sounds bad, but you have to understand. We didn't mean to hurt you. It just happened." "It just happened," I repeated softly, like months of secret messages, like late-night talks behind my back, like sneaking out of our bed while I cried myself to sleep. My mother let out a quiet sob. Laura set her cup down with a shaking hand. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she whispered. "We never wanted to." "To what?" I cut in, turning to her. "To marry him behind my back? To stand next to me at the altar while sleeping with my husband?" She flinched. "You were my friend," I said, my voice breaking for the first time. "My sister. I trusted you with everything, and you chose to stand next to me in my wedding photos, knowing full well you were already sharing something with him that I didn't know about." Tears spilled over her lashes. "I love him," she choked. "I always have." "And I didn't?" I asked. "You think that makes this any less of a betrayal?" Julian reached for my arm. "Can we talk about this in private?" he begged. "Please, not in front of everyone." I pulled my arm back. "You were not afraid of everyone when you decided to cheat on me with my best friend while our families slept under the same roof," I said. "You don't get privacy now because the truth is inconvenient." My father spoke then, his voice low and controlled in a way that made everyone at the table sit up straighter. "Julian," he said, "when you came to my house to ask for my daughter's hand, I believed you. I believed you were an honorable man, that you would protect her, cherish her. I opened my home and my wallet to help you two start a life together. Now I find out that, on the very night we celebrated your vows, you were in the hallway with another woman." He shook his head. Disappointment etched into every line on his face. "You are no son to me," he said. "Not after this." Julian's father looked like he might be sick. His mother kept whispering, "Oh my God, oh my God," over and over, staring at her son as if she had never seen him before. Laura's parents, sitting at the other end of the table, were pale and stiff, staring at their daughter in disbelief. "Please," Laura whispered, her voice barely audible, "can we just go somewhere and talk?" I took a deep breath. "No," I said. Everyone looked at me. "I have spent months," I continued, "talking, rationalizing, making excuses in my own head for every distant look, every strange silence. I let myself believe I was just insecure, overly sensitive, difficult. I am done with that." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the ring. For a second, I just looked at it. The symbol I had wanted so badly. Now it felt like a prop from someone else's play. Then I placed it gently on the table in front of Julian. His eyes widened. "What are you doing?" he whispered. "I'm returning something that doesn't belong to me," I said. "This is a symbol of a promise. You broke yours before the ink on the marriage license was even dry." "You're overreacting," he said desperately. "We can fix this. No," I said, and my voice, to my own surprise, was steady. "You broke my trust. You broke my heart. You broke the foundation of everything we just stood up there and swore to each other. There is no fixing that. Not with time, not with apologies, not with therapy. You made your choice, Julian. I'm making mine." I straightened my shoulders. "This marriage is over," I said. "It ended last night, right outside my door." My mother started crying again quietly. My father put an arm around her, his jaw clenched. Laura covered her face with her hands. Julian sat there staring at the ring, his chest rising and falling rapidly, as if he'd just noticed that everything he'd taken for granted was actually breakable. I turned to my parents. "I'm going to pack my things," I said softly. "I'd like to leave as soon as possible." My father nodded. "We'll go with you," he said. As I turned to leave the dining room, I paused at the doorway and looked back one last time. The scene behind me, the scattered plates, the stunned faces, the ring glinting alone on the white tablecloth, was nothing like the picture I had imagined for the morning after my wedding. But it was honest. No masks, no lies, no pretending, just the truth, as ugly as it was. And for the first time since I had walked down that aisle, I felt something other than despair. I felt relief. Not because I had been betrayed, that wound would take a long time to heal, but because I knew with absolute certainty that I would not spend my life next to a man who could walk out on me on our wedding night to whisper love to someone else in the hallway. The annulment process took time, but my family stood by me. People talked, of course. They always do. The story spread in half-truths and exaggerated whispers, that I had overreacted, that these things happen, that I should have forgiven him because at least he married you. I ignored them. I changed my number. I moved out of the apartment Julian and I had chosen as our first home and back into a small place of my own. I went back to work. I went to therapy. I let myself grieve. Not just the man I thought I knew, but the future I had spent years building in my head. Laura tried to contact me a few times. Apologies, long messages, explanations that always seemed to orbit the same phrase. "I never meant to hurt you." But intentions don't erase actions. I never answered. She eventually stopped trying. Julian, too, faded out of my daily life, living only in legal documents and the occasional social media sighting, each one less polished than the last. I heard through mutual acquaintances that things between him and Laura hadn't worked out either. It figures. If a relationship is born in the shadows, it rarely thrives in the light. One evening, months later, I found myself back at the same mirror where my mother had once cried, looking at me in my wedding gown. This time, I was in jeans and a simple blouse, my hair down, my face free of heavy makeup. There were faint lines under my eyes that hadn't been there before, but there was also something new in my expression. I looked like someone who had been shattered and then deliberately put herself back together. Not the same as before, different, stronger. People love to say that the day you get married is the happiest day of your life. They don't tell you that sometimes the day you walk away from a marriage refusing to share your life with someone who deceived you is the day you actually choose your own happiness. He left me alone on our wedding night. At midnight, I heard the sounds that shattered my world, but that same night, without realizing it, I also heard something else. The sound of my own boundaries finally waking up, and that, more than anything, is what saved me.